Before Leon became the calm, controlled agent people recognize in Resident Evil 4, there was someone else shaping that version of him long before the player ever saw it. That person was Major Jack Krauser. Krauser wasn't just another soldier brought in after Raccoon City. He was part of the government's response to it, someone already hardened by combat, already disciplined, and already operating at a level Leon hadn't reached yet. When Leon was forced into that program, he didn't grow naturally into the role people now associate with him. He was trained into it. And Krauser's approach to that training wasn't about survival in the way Leon experienced in Raccoon City. It wasn't about getting through chaos and hoping to make it out. Krauser trained him to operate inside that chaos without hesitation, to move with intent, to remove the instinct to panic entirely. The difference between those two versions of Leon is everything. In Resident Evil 2, Leon reacts, he hesitates, he relies on others, he makes mistakes and survives anyway. By Resident Evil 4, none of that is there anymore. He doesn't freeze, he doesn't second-guess himself, and he doesn't rely on luck. Every movement feels deliberate, every decision immediate, and every encounter controlled. That change doesn't just happen over time. It comes from somewhere. And that somewhere is a man named Krauser.
Krauser didn't train Leon like a typical soldier. He focused on close-quarters combat, on discipline, and on efficiency in a way that stripped everything unnecessary out of how Leon fought. Under him, Leon learned to conserve movement, to stay composed under pressure, and to treat every encounter as something to be solved, not survived. The most important thing Krauser removed wasn't weakness, it was hesitation. That is why Leon feels so different to play in Resident Evil 4. When the player takes control, there is a sense of confidence built into everything he does. His posture, his timing, even the way he responds to threats all suggest someone who has already been pushed to the limit and adapted to it. You don't feel like you're controlling someone who is learning. You feel like you're controlling someone who has already learned. And that's what makes Krauser's role so important. Because even though the player never sees that training directly, they feel the result of it constantly. Every clean shot, every quick reaction, every moment where Leon stays calm while everything around him collapses is a reflection of that foundation. Krauser didn't just make Leon stronger, he made him controlled.
That control didn't come from nowhere, and it didn't come without cost. Operation Javier is where everything changes for Krauser. He and his unit are sent into South America on a mission that was planned in secrecy, one that should have been controlled, organized, and supported. Instead, it collapses completely. The government abandons the operation, his men are killed, and Krauser is left as the only one who survives. That kind of outcome doesn't just end a mission. It changes how someone sees everything after it. For Krauser, the conclusion is simple. Strength is the only thing that matters because everything else failed him. Structure failed, leadership failed, loyalty failed. The only thing that allowed him to walk out alive was his own ability to endure it. That belief becomes absolute, and from that point on, it starts to define how he sees the world. And more importantly, how he sees Leon. Where Leon still believes in protecting people, in completing missions for a purpose beyond survival, Krauser sees that as a weakness. To him, Leon hasn't gone far enough. He has the skill, he has the training, but he hasn't accepted what Krauser has accepted, that hesitation, attachment, and restraint are the things that get people killed.
That difference doesn't stay theoretical. It becomes personal.
By the time Leon arrives in Spain in Resident Evil 4, he is already operating at a completely different level, and for most of the game, that level feels unquestioned. He moves through villages, castles, and entire groups of enemies with a kind of composure that suggests he has already faced worse and come out the other side of it. That confidence only really gets challenged when Krauser reappears. Up until that moment, the player is controlling Leon as someone who seems prepared for anything the game throws at him. But Krauser immediately changes the tone, because this is not an unknown threat or an unpredictable enemy. This is the person who trained Leon to fight in the first place, someone who understands exactly how he moves, how he reacts, and what he was taught to rely on. When Krauser reveals himself, the dynamic shifts from Leon being in control of the situation to Leon being tested by it. The familiarity between them matters because it removes any advantage Leon might have had through experience alone. Everything Leon has learned up to this point is something Krauser already understands, and in many ways, something Krauser expects. This is where the player starts to feel that Leon's skill did not develop in isolation. It was shaped, refined, and pushed into a specific form, and now that form is being challenged.
The encounter in the mines is where that idea becomes completely clear. Krauser does not approach the fight like any other enemy in the game. He does not rely on numbers or on overwhelming force, or on the kind of chaotic pressure Leon has been dealing with up to this point. Instead, he forces the fight into close-quarters combat, into the exact kind of situation he trained Leon for. This is deliberate. Krauser uses his knife, his movement, and his control over distance to dominate the encounter, and in doing so, he exposes the difference between them. Leon is capable, and the player can feel that, but Krauser is sharper. His attacks are more precise, his reactions are faster, and he never hesitates. At one point, Leon reaches for his gun. That moment is important because it directly contradicts what Krauser taught him. The training was built around efficiency and instinct, and in close-quarters combat, that means committing to the fight in front of you, rather than stepping back into something safer but slower. Krauser immediately punishes that decision. He catches Leon off guard, pushes him back, and makes it clear that even with all of his experience, Leon is still capable of falling into habits that break the discipline he was taught. The fight continues to escalate, and Leon is pushed closer and closer to defeat, not because he is unskilled, but because Krauser is operating at the level Leon was trained to reach. Leon survives that encounter because Luis intervenes, but the outcome still matters. It shows that Krauser's training did not just give Leon his strength, it also created a standard that Leon is still trying to fully meet. At the same time, it reinforces something else. The reason Leon survives long enough for that intervention to happen is because of that training. His ability to react, to adapt under pressure, and to stay composed even when he is being outmatched all come directly from what Krauser drilled into him. The fight demonstrates both sides of that influence at once. Krauser shows Leon what perfect execution of that training looks like, and Leon shows how far that training has already carried him.
After that encounter, the difference between them becomes less about skill and more about direction. Operation Javier left Krauser with a very specific conclusion, and everything he does after that point follows from it. He believes that strength is the only thing that matters because everything else failed him. That belief pushes him towards Los Iluminados, not because he believes in their cause, but because they offer him something he thinks he needs: power. He kidnaps Ashley as part of their plan, not out of loyalty, but because it aligns with his pursuit of that power. He kills Luis without hesitation to secure the amber,
And throughout all of this, he treats every action as a step towards becoming stronger, regardless of the consequences. This is where his influence on Leon becomes more complex. Krauser taught Leon how to fight, how to stay composed, and how to operate under pressure. But he also represents what happens when that mindset is taken too far. By removing hesitation and focusing entirely on strength, Krauser loses everything else that once defined him. His judgment becomes narrower, his motivations become singular, and his actions become more extreme. Leon, on the other hand, carries the same training but applies it differently. He uses the discipline Krauser gave him to protect others, to stay focused on his objective, and to move forward without losing sight of why he is there. The same skills that Krauser uses to pursue power are the ones Leon uses to complete his mission and keep people alive. That contrast is what builds towards their final encounter. Krauser is still the one who created the foundation of Leon's abilities, but by this point he has moved away from the balance that made those abilities effective in the first place. He is stronger, more aggressive, and more willing to escalate, but he is also less controlled in the way that originally defined him, and that is what ultimately gives Leon the advantage. By the time Leon reaches the island, the dynamic between him and Krauser has completely shifted from a single encounter into something much more deliberate. Krauser is no longer testing Leon in a confined fight. He is constructing an entire environment designed to push him to failure. Everything Leon faces on the island reflects that. There are drones tracking movement, turrets controlling space, minefields limiting positioning, and constant pressure from ranged attacks, including explosive arrows and machine gun fire. None of this is random. It is all structured in a way that forces Leon to think, react, and move exactly as he was trained to. Krauser is not trying to overwhelm Leon with numbers in the same way the rest of the game does. He is trying to break his discipline. Every trap is placed to punish hesitation. Every attack is timed to disrupt control. And every encounter is designed to force Leon into making a mistake. This is where the player feels Krauser's influence most clearly, not through dialogue or story, but through how the game plays. The only way to get through these sections is to stay composed, to move efficiently, and to rely on instinct rather than panic. If the player hesitates, they are punished immediately. And that is exactly how Krauser trained Leon. What makes this section effective is that Leon is no longer learning those skills, he is relying on them. Every time he avoids a trap, reacts to an ambush, or pushes forward under pressure, he is demonstrating that the training held. Krauser may have designed the environment to break him, but in doing so, he is also forcing Leon to prove that he has fully absorbed everything he was taught. When Krauser finally confronts Leon again, the fight is no longer just about skill or discipline. It becomes about power. By this point, Krauser has gone beyond the mindset that originally defined him. Instead of relying purely on precision and control, he has enhanced himself with the Plaga, gaining strength, speed, and the ability to mutate into something far more dangerous. From his perspective, this is the logical next step. If strength is everything, then becoming stronger is the only way forward. But this is where his thinking starts to break down. The version of Krauser that trained Leon was dangerous because of his control. Every movement was deliberate, every action efficient, and every decision calculated. That was the foundation he built into Leon. By turning to mutation and raw power, Krauser begins to move away from that foundation. He becomes more aggressive, more forceful, and more reliant on overwhelming strength rather than precise execution.
Leon does not follow him in that direction. Instead, Leon continues to fight using the same discipline Krauser taught him, but without abandoning the balance that keeps it effective. He stays focused, he reads the situation, and he responds with control rather than escalation. The player feels this directly because the fight demands that same approach. It is not about matching Krauser's power, it is about staying composed long enough to outmaneuver it. In a way, Krauser creates the exact conditions for his own defeat. He moves away from what made him effective, while Leon holds on to it.
The final stage of the fight makes that difference undeniable. Even with all of his enhancements, even with the advantage of strength and aggression, Krauser is eventually pushed into a position where he can no longer continue. The fight becomes less about overwhelming Leon and more about surviving against him. And that shift shows that Leon has finally reached and then moved beyond the level Krauser trained him for. What matters here is not just that Leon wins, but how he wins. He does not overpower Krauser through brute force. He does not match him in raw strength. Instead, he applies the exact skills he was taught, but with a level of clarity and restraint that Krauser no longer has. Every movement is still efficient, every decision still controlled, but now it is combined with a purpose that goes beyond survival or power. That is the difference. Krauser trained Leon to remove hesitation, but Leon never lost his reason for fighting. He still protects, he still focuses on his objective, and he still operates with a sense of control that is not driven by anger or revenge. When Krauser, unable to move, asks Leon to finish it, there is a clear recognition of that outcome. He tells Leon that he trained him well. That line is not just an acknowledgement of Leon's skill. It is an acknowledgement that Leon has taken what he was taught and used it in a way Krauser no longer could.
Looking at the entire sequence, it becomes clear that Krauser's influence is what allows Leon to survive everything the game throws at him. The control, the precision, and the ability to stay composed under pressure are all direct results of that training. And without them, Leon would not make it through the situations he faces. But Krauser's story also shows the limit of that mindset. Operation Javier pushed him into a position where he believed strength was the only thing that mattered. And from that point on, every decision he made was built around that idea. He sought power, aligned himself with Los Iluminados, and ultimately transformed himself in pursuit of becoming stronger. But in doing so, he lost the balance that originally made him effective. Leon does not make that mistake. He takes the training, keeps the discipline, and uses it to complete his mission. But he does not allow it to define him completely. He does not abandon his purpose, and he does not reduce everything to a question of strength alone. That is why he surpasses Krauser. Not because he is stronger, but because he is more controlled. Not because he rejects the training, but because he understands it better than the person who gave it to him. For the player, this is what makes Leon feel the way he does in Resident Evil 4. The confidence, the precision, and the sense that he is always in control of the situation all come from Krauser's influence. But the reason he remains grounded, the reason he continues to protect rather than dominate, comes from the fact that he never followed Krauser all the way. In the end, Krauser created the weapon. Leon decided what that weapon would be used for. And that is the difference that defines both of them.